Ah, now we're recording. Welcome to Thoughts on
Look
Talk.
natural.
You can smile and talk at the same time.
Do I look natural right now?
No, you look like a ventriloquist.
So if you move your lips and I'll just sit here like this.
I don't want to be the, oh, that's the dummy, doesn't it? You can be the dummy. I don't know why suddenly ventriloquism struck me as kind of a creepy
No, you're moving your lips. You're not supposed to be moving your lips.
I don't want to play this game.
It looks like a jib jab fit.
It
Okay.
does.
Hi everyone, it's Thoughts on Talks.
Thoughts on lots of things, apparently, like ventriloquism and dummies. That's how we start off. The thing is, the point, though, is to not only enjoy the comedy stylings of Rev.Mike McMorrow, but to talk about the Sunday talk. So yesterday's talk was Easter Sunday. Yep, he looks very serious and holy. Easter Sunday, April 12th. I just glanced at my calendar. Yes. And he acted nothing like that yesterday. So thankfully, if you didn't see the live stream of the service, you'll want to go back and watch it. There were lots of positive comments. Thankfully, he wasn't doing, here's the church, here's the steeple. Open the door and see all the people.
Because there weren't any.
Yeah, you should do it with the flat hand. Where's all the people?
Yeah, really.
People were online, though. We had, I think, 72 at one point on the live stream.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if you happen to be one of those, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And we also had a visitor for the first time.
Oh.
Who was on not only on watching us on YouTube, but also joined us on Zoom in the fellowship.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. We haven't connected yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Very nice. So there were a lot of positive comments in the chat during the Sunday service. I don't know, you haven't watched it back, so you didn't see any of the positive comments.
I hate watching myself.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I took screenshots, so I'm not going to share them. I'm just going to read from them because that would take extra. I would have had to.
Precious time.
Yeah.
One of us could say something brilliant in that time. You never know.
You never know. And I'm going to give credit to Vivica for this one. Let me see.
So Vivica got on. That's great.
Yes. And so it was, she said, Jesus representing the divine, coming to us and being within us was the first time I heard a way to look at Jesus and the crucifixion that I could ever relate to. Thank you, Reverend Mike.
Oh. Well, that should be thank you, Joseph Campbell.
Well, it's nice
of you. The Reverend Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you had referenced the book Thou Art That, which is one of the many Joseph Campbell books.
Yes.
And that's the one you used a few times during the service, yeah?
Yes.
And
well, from that same passage, yes.
Okay. So one of the things I really like about Joseph Campbell is that, like we do at CSL and in religious science, Joseph Campbell looked at all of the religions and folk tales and just stories that people tell about the human condition and life, and put them together and saw one monomyth, which he distilled down into the hero's journey. But in the process, if you read his works, he's done a wonderful job of finding the spiritual without it necessarily being religious, but using the symbolism and connecting it all. So when he talks about things like crucifixion, which for a lot of people have a lot of charge as being, something they grew up with that was either used to make them behave in a certain way, or, it's one of those charged things. And so Joseph Campbell makes it all just very metaphysical, really. So
Well, and I like Campbell because he was a trained anthropologist.
Mm.
And so his viewpoints come through decades of scholarly work through the field of anthropology.
Right.
And like you were saying, finding this hero's journey
The transcendent,
distillate. Yeah.
the word I think he uses, that there's the transcendent that comes through in all of the myths and stories and just teachings from all the different religions. And there's symbolism and characters that recur throughout.
Right.
And so yeah, finding the transcendent or the divine, he uses those words a lot.
Well, and there are so many, I didn't get into this yesterday, but there are so many pagan elements that are enfolded within the Hebrew story and the New Testament story of Jesus. Whether these are coincidences,
I saw a huge
influences, depends on who you ask. I think we know so much more. We know so much more now as far as the scholarship around the Bible and how it was constructed.
I saw a video on YouTube. I like watching little educational, especially educational for children videos on YouTube that have cartoons. And I saw one about the world's first author. And she's the Sumerian high priestess named Enheduanna. And she had taken cuneiform, I think is how you say it.
Yes.
Cuneiform. And it's the symbols that had been used to just track exchanges, mathematical, and keep inventory. And she used it to write praises, hymns of praise to the goddess Inanna, who was like the creation deity. Yes. Inanna or Inanna? I think it might have been Inanna. I might be getting it mixed up with Firefly Inanna. She's also a goddess, I mean, somewhere. But,
I don't remember. I think that actually came from DeGrasse's version of Cosmos.
Ooh.
I believe.
So
familiar.
That little video that was a few minutes, like maybe it was less than 15 minutes long, talked about how her feelings that she expressed through language was the first time that it was used for poetry or anything artistic or to tell a story. And it influenced all the religions that came after. So, if anybody wants to find that YouTube video, it's the world's first author in Sumer. She was Sumerian. And it was really educational. I had not heard of her. I had heard of the goddess, but not that high priestess. Right. So I was happy to learn that.
Yeah.
But I love that broken open like an eggshell as a theme for Easter. It's perfect.
Well, and the one thing that I didn't really develop, which I could have, would have been the idea of going from being heartbroken to broken open. Right? So all of us know heartbreak, right? And when we get on the other side of that, there's often a tremendous lesson contained within it that really we could not have learned any other way.
Yeah, unfortunately, pain is a great teacher because it really gets our attention.
Well, in a way, the crucifixion story is kind of that thing also.
Yeah.
Right? Because, there are so many actors, right, to use Neville's imagery of being that God in the actor of all of these roles. So the actor, the Jesus part of Mary and the women at Golgotha, the soldier piercing with the lance, piercing the heart, the Simon the Serene, which another one of my too dark images you couldn't really see. Did you see that on the YouTube? Did it come through very clear?
I don't remember seeing it, so I guess.
Yeah, so anyway.
Might have been distracted by the chat.
By the chatting. But at any rate, there's all these places, or Veronica, right? So, of course, all of this imagery is very available to Catholics because they have a ritual, a prayer ritual that they have called the Stations of the Cross. And so you go through the various, that's how you learn the Passion story.
Okay.
Yeah. So Good Friday is a kind of grueling, really, for an altar boy.
Okay.
It's a 3-hour thing, yeah.
And that's when you do the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday?
Stations of the Cross, and there's lots of rosary, and it's been a while now since I've actually sat through the whole thing, but I just remember, man, that's a lot of religion for one day.
Well, I grew up in New Thought, so the only times that I really paid attention to the traditional Christian, like the lead up to Easter, even Lent, seemed like a side note or something to just structure the.
When I often wonder if I need to, rethink all of that, my approach to all of that, whether it's Easter or Christmas. But so many people, like I said yesterday, are refugees from other faith systems.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I mean, you could answer this question, but when I do meet those who've been raised in unity or New Thought, they can't really relate to the idea of religion being like a hammer.
Right.
That people sometimes experience.
Right. Yeah. It's a different way of approaching it if no one's ever forced you to do it, or if there was no mandatory.
Right. Well, there's a coercion.
Right.
Right. From. So I don't know if this is so in other Christian faith traditions. I don't even know if it's true within the Catholic tradition anymore. But it used to be a grievous sin to miss Mass on Sunday.
Wow.
So that used to be what was called a mortal sin. So in Catholicism, we had classifications of sin. Okay. So they're the ones that you can, die with and still get into the party. And then there's the ones that you die with that you can't get past the velvet rope. So, yeah.
Interesting.
So you can't even relate to that, right? So I don't know which one is more psychologically healthy or unhealthy, but yeah, I think so. For religious science, right? I think that it's a much healthier, mentally healthy faith system. But it is kind of missing that moral conscience component.
I can see
more
that.
Traditional systems have. Certainly Judaism and Islam have it, and Christianity does as well. So,
but then in senses like, that using the crucifixion as a symbol of crossing out as a symbol of, as you referenced from Joseph Campbell, that intersection of, well, how did you put it again? I have your notes here. I have to search for it. Of like the inner and the outer.
Right. Well, there's the intersection point, right? So you
Right.
have life on this level of expression, and then we have our spiritual life that has ascension within it. And so
Mm-hmm.
the intersection point of those two things, right? This is where we live.
Yeah.
And so, I suppose we can work our way up the cross,
And
perhaps,
then it's a capital T eventually for truth. There we go.
for truth, for transformation, right?
There you
So,
go.
wow, we just invented a really great metaphor right there.
Good thing we're recording.
Stay tuned for next Sunday.
He's taking notes. One of the images that came to me when we were talking about the cracking open, going back to the egg, it is in Japanese culture. There's this type of art that they do with broken pottery that they put it back together, but they use gold to fill the cracks, and it makes it something more beautiful. But
Right.
you know it's been through something, or it wouldn't have the cracks.
Right.
But it adds value for having gone through that process. So,
Goes from being whole to being broken, and then really being made priceless, right? A
yeah.
priceless work of art, each one uniquely different.
So then that's the difference between innocence and maybe integrity, where that moral thing you were talking about, in innocence, you're in this kind of clean slate state. But if you're that priceless pottery that's been through things and come back together and learned and grown, then instead of it being an outwardly moral code that's put upon you, it's just staying in integrity and alignment with your values and who you want to be. And so I feel like that's what religious science and new thought teaches us, is that our choices have an impact on us spiritually and on all that we affect in the world, because we're all connected. So it may have more of a, I don't know if it's selfless sort of focus, because keeping yourself out of hell, at least at the moment, sounds like it's a selfish thing. Like you're doing it just for yourself to not experience torture. But if you're doing it to be a true, clear vessel, and you're doing it to raise the consciousness of everyone, it has a little different emphasis.
Well, yes, and I would also say it reminds me of the 12-step expression of you can't give something away you haven't got. Right? So when we feel like we have enough, right? When we feel like we have enough, then we have enough to share.
Yes.
Right? And for some of us, that's, some of us have this insatiable need that can never be filled. And for others, and I think this is what spiritual practice is, that it doesn't take much to feel enough. In fact, right where we are, we know we are enough. Right? And so from that place, then, we can actually do a lot of good in the world.
Yeah.
Because our motives are clean.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that they're always that way, but certainly the potential is there. So then it begs the question, well, can we still do good if our intentions aren't pure? And I would say absolutely yes. We absolutely can. So, for instance, can we help feed the homeless and still, pass judgment on the beggar who won't get up and help themselves? Right? Well, we absolutely can. In fact, we need to do that in spite of what we think. I think this is the great value of many of the traditional faith systems that we come from, because that's basically what we're told to do, right? But there's not really much exploration as to the psychology of that, right? So Jesus, for instance, can say, that which you do to the least of my brothers, that you do to me. So then you end up feeding people because Jesus said to, right?
But should it be that you're feeding people because then you're feeding Jesus? And if you love Jesus so much, you should treat everybody like you would treat him.
Or
so
because you want to get into heaven.
Okay.
Right? And so you're going to get this other, or you can be moved by compassion,
right?
And equanimity, which is a much deeper experience, right? To be moved to help those less fortunate than ourselves.
Right.
So we don't really have that tradition in New Thought. But I think it's implied that once you know that you're enough, then you have enough to share.
Exactly.
So that the prosperous universe that we speak to happens by means of each one of us. So God is prosperous. The universe is prosperous because we are prosperous. And
maybe the action taken based on the thought, like New Thought, can be a very internal experience because you're changing your thinking to change your life. And then when we take that into action and step out into our communities, then we're influencing other people's thoughts and lives, which then we're really creating a world that works for all if everybody can come from that inner knowing, that place within them and that connection. So an example that comes to mind is I was talking to some friends on Zoom last night, and one of them was saying how their Facebook feed was filled with so many things that just made them so sad, and he gave an example. And I thought, wow, my Facebook feed is actually full of really positive stuff. And it's because over time, the friends I've made and the things that I've, clicked like on, the algorithm, which could be, a metaphor for universal energy, like attracting like, has made it so that my Facebook feed is all people who are, helpful and positive, and so that's based on my choices and my actions over time has created this world that I live in. It could be seen as a bubble that I created as well, because I don't pay attention to things that necessarily bum me out or something. But going out and doing service when we're allowed to be in each other's presence and help each other in person is a similar thing. It's, the hands and feet version.
Well, we do our work in consciousness first, right? We straighten out our own gig. Then we're moved in some way, right, to take action in some way. And it might be take action, showing up for a church service. It might just be that we are witnessing to each other in spiritual community, right? Well, that's a safe place to do it because we all think alike, right? So we're all Catholics, or we're all Jewish, or we're all religious scientists, right? And then we're moved to do something greater. But in all of it, it happens first in consciousness.
Right.
But when we are all doing this from compassion and equanimity, then we really are the life of God expressing.
Yeah.
And that is that world that works for, the world that works for everyone.
Right.
Which really is about finding ways to focus on the ways that we agree rather than disagree. So yesterday's approach, of course, in the Easter message, so my brother was asking me about it, and I know that he goes to a Bible-based Protestant church. I don't know if they're evangelical, probably.
Okay.
So he was asking me about it, and I said, yeah, well, it's a heretical Easter. And he goes, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, compared to your viewpoint, it's probably pretty heretical. So I don't know, I'll send you the link. I don't know. I said, actually, you'll probably agree with about 90% of what's in it. And I think that is so. But this goes to the point that I was heading to earlier, which is in religious science, it is kind of tricky because there are so many people who come from other faith systems.
Right.
And we really need to heal whatever that stuff is that we came in with. So, and some of it's legit, right? So let's say you were, abused by a cleric.
Right.
Right. And not, I never once experienced sexual abuse of any kind by priests. And I was around them a lot because I was an altar boy.
Mm-hmm.
But they could be abusive, verbally.
Yeah.
Some of the nuns. So, for instance, I remember when I made my first communion, which is a big deal in the Christian church, right? You're receiving Jesus, and you're 7 years old, right?
Wow.
So your faith is, pure as the driven snow, really. And then when and you get these little missals, right? And the missals teach you the mass, and there's pictures and all the various parts of it.
Okay.
But she gave us this white ribbon as a bookmark and told us that if we ever committed a mortal sin, it would turn black. Right? Now, I know, man. So now that's not like abuse, but it's kind of an insidious trip to put on someone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's and that was just, one. Was that the doctrine of the Catholic Church? No. Was it even the teaching of the Monsignor that was running that particular church? Probably not. I'm sure Monsignor Cruisling, didn't know anything about it. So
it is a teaching method, but maybe not the most positive teaching method. It's using guilt and fear and, really a form of manipulation. Manipulation,
but mostly fear, right?
Yeah.
So the fear of stepping out of line.
Yeah.
Because God who loves you, right? So then there's also this kind of psychotic thing going on about teaching what the nature of God is.
Yeah.
But God loves you unless.
Right.
Right. So we have to unpack that kind of stuff. I think that's why so many converts, if you will, to religious science are in their 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. Because you kind of have to be old enough to be willing to look at some of these things strenuously. And to just strip them away.
Well, yeah, because when you're in
a very developed psyche to be able to do that.
Right.
It's like going, you go to therapy, not because you're ready to have a deep discussion about your life, but because something in it's not working.
Right.
Right. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but
Well, I'm as I'm scanning through your notes in the background here, I see everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
yeah, Albert King, yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's such a great song too, because and he talks about all kinds of different things. Like
Uh-huh.
everybody wants to, what was it? Everybody wants to hear the truth, but still everybody lies, or something like that.
Okay.
You know, I forget how he put it, but
I was having a discussion with another friend about the concept of being clear with our intention and choosing the right words for affirmations and that sort of thing. And her question was, well, if God loves me, then doesn't, and she comes from a Catholic background, so she was saying, doesn't God then already know what's on my heart, and it doesn't really matter the words I use to pray or to do the affirmation? And I'm looking at this quote that you shared from Ernest Holmes, or I think it's Ernest Holmes, because you followed up, nobody wants to die. Ernest Holmes said, heaven and hell are not places, they're states of consciousness. And then you said, it keeps us blocked from the sunlight of the spirit.
yeah.
So that's what I was saying to her, that when we're our clearest, then there's less keeping us from accepting the love of God, the light of God, which is always there for us, but it's our consciousness and our belief system and our maybe beating ourselves up for things that we've taken on that aren't true, that we need to get ourselves clear so that we're a clear channel for that.
Right, because it's, yeah, so God knows what we think. The important thing is, do we know what we think? Right?
Fine, yeah.
So, and that's, to me, that's not always so easy, because
No.
we're dealing with something where language can often fail us.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're talking about an experience, and an experience with a presence, an energy, an intelligence, love, right?
Yeah.
Now, put your hands around love, right? Right? I want to know what love is, right? And we have all these songs about it because, it's more emotion, it's more of a than a.
Yeah. Well, and when you said God knows what's on our heart, or God knows what we're thinking, but do we know? I thought of the times when, like I'm doing something and I think I know what I'm doing, but my friends who are observing me are like, really? Is that sure? Are you sure that's what you really want to do? And so they know better because they've been there. So they're looking at me with kind of
that guy? That guy?
But it's the sort of that image of God as a parent, that loving energy that is, the love is there and is just waiting for you to get to go through your process to accept it. Not going to do it for you, not going to force you. It's yours to do. So that's in the personification of, Jesus talked about God as the Father to explain to us that loving relationship. But we don't, in religious science, we don't need to have, although it's nice to think of the personification of God, we also know that there's more to it, that's our trying to put our understanding around this huge everything energy.
Well, and like you say, it's always present. And so, of course, the way Jesus said that, knock and I shall enter,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not like knock and if I'm in the neighborhood, I'll stop in and we'll have a cup of tea.
Right.
So the implication there is that always present, and I'm just waiting.
Yeah. Yeah. Just here for you. So I've just come upon the part in the notes where you're talking about the obsession with celestial bodies and how they moved in the sky.
Yeah. So, you know, part of that was, have you ever seen that movie, Agora or Agora?
I don't think so.
Agora. Rachel Wiest, is that her name? The gal who's married to Daniel Craig.
She was?
I think they still are.
I know her from the Mummy movies.
That's right. She was in the Mummy. So anyway, she's playing the Alexandrian philosopher. Begins with an H. I forget her name.
Okay.
But anyway.
I'll look her up on Internet Movie Database.
The only reason why I bring it up is because one of the professors of the great courses that a lot of the stuff that I throw out there on a Sunday is not from, careful study from a scholarly background, but rather, really the cliff notes of scholarly pursuits, which is the great courses. If people
It's
don't
still
know.
scholarly.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy was talking about how you can get a sense of what things were like from this movie.
Oh, okay.
His opinion. And so it was actually Campbell who's the observation. I called it an obsession after watching this movie. But really, when you get a thought worm like that, where you're trying to sort out, the way something works, particularly mechanically.
Okay.
But it was Campbell who said that they were trying to make these two things work.
Okay.
And there you go. That's it. And so I couldn't really elaborate on, because what often happens is in preparing to do these talks, I end up down all kinds of internet rabbit holes.
Mm-hmm.
And so in looking up, so what's the difference between the solar calendar and the lunar calendar?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the difference between the Jewish calendar and the solar calendar? And when does the lunar calendar begin? Which begins with the new moon, by the way. And so the ancients were always trying to figure out how to square the lunar calendar with the solar calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there's 365 days, right? And there's about 12 moons.
Right.
New moons.
Mm-hmm.
So the lunar calendar is set to the new moon, which it turns out, and I'm surprised that I didn't learn this until at this age, but it's that sliver of the moon that you see right before sunset or sundown. And there's a little sliver of the moon that you can see on the horizon because there's no moon out.
Right.
Because, of course, the Earth is in the way of the sun. So
it's interesting that it would be calculated on new moons rather than full moons, because full moons you could see very clearly and measure by, it would seem like.
Well, I think it's because it's the smallest sliver of a moon that you can still see.
Okay.
I think that's why. It's also a good time to go fishing, by the way, because the fish can't eat it. They can't see at night.
Yeah, but you can when it's a full moon.
In the morning, you can hammer them.
I've gone on a full moon sail. I've gone sailing at night. And
oh, yes.
I had never really even thought about how much better you could see at night under a full moon until I went sailing, and it was, a lake that had no lights around it. It was in Sri Lanka. And then it was like very obvious. Like, oh my gosh, I've been out here at night before and couldn't see anything. Nature.
Well, yeah, I love that story because somehow we were talking about that one day. But and I can only imagine, like when you're telling the story, I'm thinking of Sri Lanka in the same way I experienced Ireland, when dark is dark, because there's no artificial lighting out either. Not in the way that certainly Los Angeles is, but even, any place in America really. I don't know how developed Sri Lanka is, but in those days, in the late 70s, there was not much electrification out in Leitrim anyway.
Okay.
So,
well, the lake that I was on is outside of the main city. It's still in it's got paved roads and shops, but you go inland a little bit where it becomes more like a little village. And there are houses now built around the edge of it, but they're vacation homes for, the big ones. So there aren't necessarily people in them all the time. And even that light from a house, if it's far enough back from the shoreline, it doesn't throw that much light. It's not enough to see the edge or a dock or something, or fishing.
Running into something. Yeah, to keep from running into something. Right.
Yeah.
So it's hard for us to imagine, I think, that there are places in the earth where, when it's dark, you can stick your hand in front of your face and literally not see it at all, not have any semblance, Anyway.
So you could see where the ancients would have been obsessed with figuring all this out, because it was more obvious when
there's no light pollution, right?
Yeah.
So they have this other great scene in the movie where they have a reflecting pool that's completely still, and this is how they would observe the night sky. So there's a big hole in the middle of this structure, domed structure, and so they're looking down into this reflecting pool to see what's going on above them.
Interesting.
So there's no light pollution, right? And what they were puzzling with, as I mentioned yesterday, and I've mentioned around Christmas as well, is this idea of wandering stars. Because it wasn't until they figured out that, first of all, that everything wasn't revolving around the Earth, right? So when your basic assumption about life is wrong, and you think everything revolves around you, then when you see that one thing that's not staying in the pattern, it doesn't make any sense, because your basic assumption is wrong.
Yes.
And so, Ptolemy thought that these heavenly bodies worked in a perfect circle. They believed in the sacredness of the circle. But of course, it turns out it's elliptical.
Yeah.
So another assumption kept them from. So it was a really great theory that just wasn't true.
Yeah.
Right.
Huh.
So, and some of that stuff didn't get worked out for hundreds of years, maybe.
Right.
I think it was Copernicus who first worked it out. Copernicus, I think, said this, that we're revolving around the sun. And then I think it was Newton then who figured out the mathematics from that.
Okay.
But we're talking over 1,000 years, man, maybe 1,200 years to work it out.
Well, I can see too where you would be so steeped in the scholars of the time were often religious teachers, and if they told you this is the way the world works, like the way God built the world and it's perfectly round and we're the center, then you wouldn't necessarily question it without a lot. And the people who did question it were often killed or, jailed at the very least as heretics. So.
And now we have this a very odd challenge as faith teachers, because now we have the world of science, which has stripped so much of the mystery, right? So really, you went to these teachers to help explain the way the world is and our place in it, right?
And there's still plenty of mystery left, I think.
There's still plenty, but science has stripped away so much of it.
Yeah.
Right? And then left big questions like, how can you raise from the dead? How do you explain that? Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I love the idea that the paranormal is a real thing. I have many friends, perhaps you're one of them, who absolutely believe in spooks and ghosts and seeing people after they're dead and talking to the dead. And, you know, and there are many people who've had near-death experiences and so forth who come back and report all kinds of things. This has not been my experience, right? And yet there has been this fascination, right? So one of the things that made Shakespeare so popular in his day was that most of his plays have a ghost in them somewhere, right? And so the ghost is not only a literary device that helps inform the story,
right?
But it's something that people, I mean, we actually believed in these kinds of things until fairly recently. So, and many people still do. And I'm willing, right?
Well, if anything,
and maybe we just haven't devised the ways of measuring such things. But like my friend Dr. Mary Helen Hensley, I mean, she's very persuasive when she talks about this stuff. And she's written several books about it. And she's a very popular author and lecturer. And Eben Alexander is another one, Dr. Eben Alexander. So they're starting to develop experiments now to help quantify these experiences.
And still, I mean, the reason that people are talking about them is so many people have had some experience of it and described it in such a similar way. So that's like anecdotal evidence.
Right.
But there's still, we have all this science and all of these abilities to measure things, but there's still a lot that we can't measure and we can't quantify, and we, you know, may get little pieces, but we don't get the full knowledge. And so,
right. And so if there's good entities out there, then does that mean there's bad entities? If there's for every good angel, does that mean there's a devil? I mean, you know, it just, to me, it actually creates more questions than it solves.
Right. And if we go back to the example about the mistaken framework that was being used, if you're measuring Earth as the center, not the sun, if you're measuring with circular orbits instead of elliptical, like maybe we have this same wrong framework for this. Maybe it's not what we think it is at all. And our experience and our hopes are shaping whatever it is.
Well, and maybe, you know, maybe the physicists are right. It is an 11-dimension world, right? So apparently it takes 11 dimensions to make this whole unified theory thing work.
And has anybody
I don't have the brain power for that. I'm just trying to figure out the 3-dimensional world. But if that is true, right, then that would help explain, you know, there's other dimensions to life and people are phasing in and out. So, you know, Jesus, you know, phased in from the 5th dimension along with Marilyn McCoo and the age of Aquarius and the rest of the solid gold singers. You know, maybe he phased in from another dimension. In the Vedic tradition, you know, I understand that's, you know, that is
How
It's
they see it.
sort of like that you phase in and out. And that, you know, practitioners of meditation, strong practitioners of meditation are able to do this. So, you know, the Maharishi was, you know, supposedly teaching levitation. I mean, I heard about that in the 70s even. But, you know, I think it's great. You say you can levitate, that's awesome. Just let's get it. Let's get it on film and let's measure it. I mean, if you can levitate, I mean, if you could get, I mean, it would be amazing if you even just got like a sheet of paper. You could levitate and I could just even slide this under your fanny while you're sitting there.
My question is,
that would be amazing.
You can levitate, but how does that help you in any part of life? Like, yeah, it's cool, but can you also levitate and float over something that I can't reach to get something really high for me? You know, I'm looking for the practical application too.
Well, can you levitate and not be a resentful jerk? Right? And be nice to your neighbor?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
you know, it's the stories that we have of the Buddha, right? So the Buddha did this whole thing where he lived the life of an ascetic, and then kind of came to his senses one day, and he, you know, I don't know if he said this is crazy, right? But the story is that you know, he had this insight that it was like the string on a lute. It's too tight, the string breaks, and if it's too loose, then you can't play it. So he came up with this idea of the middle way, right?
Yeah, and then stopped hanging out by himself as an ascetic and came back into the world to teach. Because, you know, levitating by yourself.
And he really didn't engage in metaphysical conversations.
Right.
Because he just felt like it was just another distraction. This is to your point. Right? And I think he was on to something there, right? So it's great that we can have all these wonderful insights. You know, I can be like this deep minister having these great cosmic insights, but when I see you, if you don't feel like love and welcoming and that and safe,
how does it help? Right.
Something's missing.
Yeah.
So hopefully you get a little bit of both. But you know,
of course.
I mean, I do think deeply on things, but I have to say, you know, the ability to convey in the way of a Joseph Campbell, or even a Sue Rubin or a Maureen Hoyt, right? Yeah. I mean, I have my own way. I think my way is just like, you know, it's a pretty stripped down version, but to me, I feel like what I take is something that, like, say, Ernest Holmes can kind of overthink something, and you know, I just kind of present it stripped down to where it's a little more accessible. And once in a while, I'll have an original thought.
Well, you also have to.
But they're usually transition thoughts between someone else's brilliance.
Well, that's what we're all doing, right? I mean, everything in the world that we live in now is because somebody else figured some stuff out. So made it so we don't have to think about that stuff. Of course, now in our quarantine days, we're starting to think about stuff like, how can I make my own toilet paper? How about I grow my own vegetables? How about, you know, all these things? But we haven't had to think about a lot because so many people have figured stuff out before us.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to do when we all get back together is, I think was thinking about this beforehand, but I think we should have like a group project where we each get like 6 beans. And so we just observe the beans as the creative process, right? And then when they're transplanted then, and grow the beans through fruition, and then dry the beans, and then come together when that's all done to experience a sense of harvest, just to kind of connect us
to that cycle
in a simple way, right? So it's something we could do in a flower pot. We don't have to have some gigantic, garden.
Right.
But I think it would be an interesting experiment.
Yeah.
And a wonderful metaphor about how seed, thoughts as seed.
Yeah.
Right? And casting our seed upon the soil.
I'm already concerned about my seed because I'm inconsistent and plants die. So now I'm going to have to focus attention on my seed thoughts and seeds.
Well, maybe what we need is a power of 8 group where ATE. And, and so we'll just be more mindful on what we're growing.
Right. ATE. So this week, the Power of 8 group, everybody focuses their attention on you.
Yeah, for most of them, yeah. There's a few short groups, but yeah.
Okay. So have you come up with the prayer? Do you want to introduce the prayer that you're going to request for your Power of 8, or have you not formulated it yet?
Well, I have, my mom actually went in to be hospitalized yesterday for a little thing, so more will be revealed. I may invite people for prayer support around that.
Okay, and everybody watching now can lend their prayers for
yeah,
that
just,
as well.
We're in the discovery phase right now, so just, knowing that God's in the mix, right, and that she is, I am, right, in expression.
Yeah.
And that the I am that God is in, through, and as all of it, as it is for all of us.
Yeah.
So we'll see what's going on there. I brought in the prac cord last night, so they're on it already. And so far things, she didn't have a stroke, and one of her other tests came back fine, and so and there's all kinds of, you live long enough, you're going to find stuff in there, right? So there's all kinds of cysts and benign growths in all of our organs, and so and they don't affect us in any meaningful way, and if they do, we can have them removed now. But so we don't know what's going on there. And then I just really, my main thing is, and maybe this sounds a little corny, but my biggest joy and satisfaction is the growth of our community, right? The people that we already have, the people who've passed through the threshold and have wandered off, who still consider themselves members that we rarely see, and then just to really try and inspire people to want to ensure that our community is here for the next person, right? So in the Power of 8, where I purposely used trees as the name of the various groups. One, so we can have a diverse forest, which is the healthiest kind of forest you can have. But also to the idea that we're planting trees for a forest that we may not be able to enjoy. Because, you know, it takes, I don't know if you knew this, but I was a forest major in college.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so, you know, it takes, you know, the life cycle from seedling to have a harvestable tree. You know, you're talking about 50 to 75 years, right? Depending on what you're using it for. Less if it's paper. But anyway, which is why I got out of it. I really didn't want to be a tree farmer.
Okay.
But
we still worked with wood.
I ended up working on the other end of the log. Yeah. But it was a great experience, though. I mean, I've saw some gigantic trees I've seen some big trees in my day. I literally saw the world's largest sugar pine tree in Northern California.
Wow.
So a logger had gone through and do not cut and spray painted it all over the trunk, and it was gigantic. You know.
So that means it's also quite old, right?
Yes. I mean, that's the other thing about trees, you know, it's like these sequoias, you know, some of them were saplings when Columbus hit the shore.
Wow.
Right? So in my, you know, I've referenced them as, you know, sentinels to time. You know?
Yeah. If trees could talk.
If they could talk, but I think they have consciousness. I think all creation has some aspect of the divine within it, and that aspect is consciousness in some sort that coalesces and combines until it becomes aware. Right? And in the beginning, it's just aware of itself, you know, hungry, light, dark, pain, hurt, pleasure, to becoming not only aware, but being aware of being aware.
Well, in trees operate in community. There are some trees that their roots connect beneath the ground, and they're one huge organism.
The aspens, yes.
Yeah. And
that was an amazing, I mean, how many eons have humans been around aspens? And we just learned that 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Or how wolves, a population of wolves affect a community of aspen.
Wow.
The deer and all of it, you know. We're really, I mean, one thing that this COVID thing should be waking us up to give a little plug to Flourish, is how interconnected the whole thing is. And to me, this COVID virus really is a kind of a, like a lot of things that are presenting themselves, it's kind of a wake-up call. I think even Gates kind of spelled it out himself. Because, you know, so when I was a kid, I think we've talked about this before. When I was a kid, there was about 4 billion people on the planet. So the main reason why I know that is because I was an Eagle Scout, and for my Nature Merit Badge, I had to know that for some reason. And now there's almost 8 billion. So there's almost twice as many human beings on the planet within a 50-year time frame.
Yeah.
That's got to have an impact. It has to. We're pressed into areas now where, you know, I don't know. I suppose there's I hear there's a cultural reason why, you know, within Chinese culture, why they eat certain things. I think they're trying to get their chi or their energy, life force, or whatever. So that's a story that can be changed,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also pressing into these areas where humans and wildlife are now, there's just no,
There's no balance.
there's no balance. There's no, they don't have enough room.
Right.
And so, we have coyotes now down into the city,
Yeah.
looking for pets,
Mm-hmm.
and everything else. And, this virus, because the COVID virus, if it's a bad thing, it's been around then for a long time.
Yeah.
We managed to live around and have bats around us because
Well, and things change. There are mutations of genes and viruses and bacteria. I mean, things with stimuli from the outside learn to survive. So they change what they need to change to survive in whatever environment presents itself.
well, here's a Twilight Zone moment. So I'm driving in my car and I look down and I see the quarter and there's a bat on the back of the quarter. I think it was the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Stated in and it's dated 2020.
Wow.
And so I mentioned it to Stephanie and she said, well, bats are, if it wasn't for, it probably is Texas,
Okay.
because she was saying that if it wasn't for bats in the state of Texas, Texas would be overrun with insects.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently there's some big cave down there that has a bazillion of them. But they keep the insect population down. And I started thinking about that and, just all the ways that we're
Interconnected.
intertwined. Yes.
Yeah. There have been times I've wondered about the purpose of some of, like, how do mosquitoes who bite us and suck our blood, how are they helpful in the food chain? But, there's always an answer. They wouldn't be there if
something eats them.
Mm-hmm.
I know trout do.
Guppies do, which is why there are so many little guppy ponds in Sri Lanka and tropical areas.
So it's like a little natural mosquito control.
Yeah.
Mosquito abatement.
Yeah. At one point, remember when there were so many houses that had gone empty in the San Fernando Valley, but everywhere when the economy shifted, and there were pools that were being left unattended and mosquitoes were breeding in those pools. One of the ways that they curbed it was by releasing guppies into all of these pools to eat the mosquito larvae.
Really?
The only reason I know this is because my dad breeds guppies and has my whole life, which he started because they used to release them into the gutters in Sri Lanka, and he got interested in that. So it was a school project that now he breeds them for colors and fins and for decorative fish. But sometimes he will leave some water sitting out just to get mosquito larvae so he can feed them to his guppies. So I pay attention.
Maybe guppies will be on the list after bean plants.
There you go. Everybody gets a guppy.
We'll go from feeding to mosquito abatement.
It's all good metaphor for life lessons, isn't it?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So how do we bring this back to Easter?
It's me.
Spring resurrection.
There was a lot to say about that, so I don't think people really understand that these are actually pagan holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Easter is actually a Saxon word and a Saxon ritual, I suppose, for the fertility thing. tied to spring. That's where the eggs come from, and the bunnies, of course. And even the word God, right? This is why I think it's so funny when people get so hung up on the word God. Oh, I don't want to hear the word God. Well, you know, that's a German word.
Okay.
That's an Anglo-Saxon for Gott was the original word. Translated from the theos, which was the Greek word. I think we talked about this last week, right? And it's unknown whether the Greek, right, because the Hebrew Bible was translated to Greek, as were when they finally got around to writing the Christian texts, which are some 30 years after the fact. And of course, Paul wrote in Greek, because that was like the lingua franca of the day, right?
Right.
So, so it's kind of silly to get hung up on all these words anyway. So, just so extending this even further, that, I mean, this is the brilliance of Christianity, is to, if you can't beat them, join them, kind of thing.
They took over all the existing holidays and.
Right. Oh, good idea.
Yeah.
We can do that. So, but some things were sacrificed. So there was a large tree, thousands of years old, an oak tree, I believe in Germany, that was given the axe or maybe set on fire because by monks.
Okay.
And I don't have all the details of the story correct, but the idea was that it was a pagan observance because people would hang prayers or whatever on this tree. Apparently that was, but it was the oldest tree, and so
people and their destruction.
Yeah, well, because we're the prevalent system. So it would be, it would be very interesting if, to time travel,
Yeah.
or even just 100 years into the future, just to see what spirituality looks like.
Yeah.
Years from now.
It changes with us, and we, how we interpret it as people. I mean, studies of culture and history show us that a lot of our beliefs today are mishmash of past beliefs that we've handed down and taken on and have mutated like genes with time. And
well, we have an interesting phenomenon right now with this COVID business going on, because there very well could be a spiritual revival of some kind.
Yeah.
A worldwide spiritual revival. And so that will be, and we will be able to witness that.
Yeah.
Right, because that will be happening like now.
Well, so, and we're building something now. Like every choice everybody makes from within their homes during this crisis, during this COVID quarantining, sequestering thing, is creating what we're going to emerge into. And so it's our thoughts and our choices that create the new world.
And drive our Facebook feed.
Exactly.
Right. So we are on this maybe cosmic algorithm is being revealed.
Yes.
Right. Just to kind of, maybe that's how we tidy all this up.
Sure. And, people want to ask us questions or question the path, the meandering path of Thoughts on Tops. They can send us, they can put comments in the YouTube. They can.
Yeah, I think today it was more thoughts on thoughts.
I think so. It's with the talk.
Yeah.
We were talking about thought. Maybe it should be talks on thought.
You know what my favorite part of the talk yesterday, and I'm surprised you didn't mention it, was the graphic of the medical worker in the Rosie.
I did love that.
Right?
I thought it wasn't a goddess. I thought it was, is it Ostara or something? That's the egg goddess from.
Yeah.
I thought that was her at first, and then as you
Yeah,
said,
you know, that was going around for a while, but that actually was a coincidence.
Okay.
Right? So there is I think it's an Egyptian or an Assyrian goddess by that name.
Okay.
But the linguists got together and figured out that
It wasn't a direct.
wasn't a way for it to make that jump.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. But yeah, it was a beautiful piece of art. I think I have it up on my screen. I can share it. Let's see. Can I share it now that we've changed all of the
Settings.
for security? And now I'm just clicking around and getting my share screen. I can share. So, I want to share that. And then go to this and slideshow from current slide. That's not the right slide. There we go.
There she is. Yeah.
Front line.
What's that say? WWFTV?
It looks like maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. Anyway, I like this because she's a medical worker. It's a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a woman of color.
Yeah.
And she's got a tat.
Yeah. And a big muscle. It's
Right.
very like Rosie the Riveter revisited.
Exactly.
Yeah. That is a good slide. It's beautiful. It doesn't have the artist's name on it though.
No, it's someone out of New Orleans.
I remember you saying that. What other slides might we want to show since we're on the topic?
There's a nice picture of Donegal in there.
Well, that is true. Let's see, I'll share again. I like this. Joseph Campbell, unshelled.
Yeah.
That has the cross and the egg in it, unshelled.
Yeah.
There's Donegal.
Yes. So
is that like ruins of a church or?
No, that's, there's someone actually lived there, probably a thatched cottage, probably either moved to America or England.
Ah, yes.
The thatch failed, and then in time, the whole structure.
Wow, but so much remains. I mean,
it's picturesque, but it's also kind of sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in Northwest Ireland. Yeah.
It is pretty.
Yeah.
I guess it could speak to the, the changing of times. That some things last for a very long time, but it's not always what we think it is. It's
right.
gonna last.
And people have been in that area for tens of thousands of years also.
But it looks like it's a strong enough structure. Somebody could come in and, renovate, rebuild.
Yeah, I daydream about such things every time I go back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's our Albert King.
Yeah. That was his trademark, by the way, was the Flying V guitar.
Okay.
Yeah, the Gibson Flying V with these humbucker pickups, the big fatties.
Wow. I have no idea what you're talking about right now, but it sounds rock and roll and cool. Am I going backwards through this?
Yeah. There you go. You're going the wrong way.
It's as far as it'll take me that direction.
Okay.
So since I'm lost in the slides, I'll stop
It's all right.
the share and see if there's anything else. Oh, I see now.
Of course, that song yesterday got me pretty stirred up.
Right. So what do you remember what it was that really?
Well, I've heard the song before, and it always kind of gets me because the idea that everything is holy now, number one. But the imagery of the songwriter is, right out of my own life, right? So
Okay.
I used to be bread and wine, right? But now everything is holy now. So anyway, it's a really powerful song, and Ken does a great job with it also, of course.
Yeah. And I think it was wonderful. I know you said you hate crying after you gave the prayer in the sort of the musical break of that song.
Yeah, we're trying to do that more.
And it's lovely, but it's the fact that you felt so deeply on Easter and spoke so strongly. There were a lot of comments in the chat because people were really moved by you being moved.
I know.
Let's see. Oh, and your mic was on during some of the songs, so you said you sounded good.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I have to
What are the comments?
I have to make sure I turn my mic off.
People were sharing that they were also tearing up while you were tearing up. Let's see, what else did I say? Thank you for a beautiful Easter message. One of the best Easter messages I've ever received. Yeah, so I only took a few screenshots, but you can go back and see some of it. But basically, I mean, I put little clapping and go Rev hands emojis.
Yeah.
Because, we could tell you were feeling it. And so, we connected with that feeling. You're on fire.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a big Twitter guy, but and I don't know that there's many people in our congregation who are. Maybe the YouTube chat would be the way to go. But we could do a Sunday where I have a much shorter message and people could post questions, like a kind of the stump the Rev kind of.
Or we could do it as a Zoom because people enjoyed the Zoom after.
Well, certainly afterwards. Zoom really doesn't lend itself for the service itself, though.
No, I like the way that, also that the center has been set up already to broadcast the Sunday service is a wonderful thing. So, I don't think we should change that.
Right. Yeah, and people have told me that there's something comforting to seeing everybody in the places where they're supposed to be, like they're getting some sense of normal.
It is.
From the visual of it, so.
Yeah.
So happy Easter.
Yeah, we've done what we can do today. Yeah, we can all be heroes.
Yeah.
And if you're still with us and watching, thank you. And be sure to check out our other episodes and watch Sunday services if you've missed them, all available on the CSLGH YouTube channel. Any other final thoughts?
That's it. Peace and blessings. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on YouTube maybe Wednesday night if you want to join us for the meditation.
Cool.
And stay tuned for Flourish coming up someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
We'll have to see. All right. So you get to push the stop recording button.
Oh, that's right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
It's still